Good afternoon, everybody. It's almost drink time, which is really good news. So I have two suggestions. Suggestion number one is, could we dim the lights here and increase the lights here so it feels a bit more like a conversation? So that was a request. And the second request is it would be really cool, since there aren't a huge number of people here, if you could come a little closer for the ones at the back so that we can actually have a discussion and conversation. So if it is possible to adjust the lighting, I think that'd be good, because what I find in rooms like this is that there's those that are blinded and there's those that doze off. We're not doing either of those two things. So a small and perfectly formed group of people, both here, by the way, and there. My name is Graham Coakley. I want to say two things. One is I'm a Scotsman. And the second is, because I'm a Scotsman, I tell the truth, and I say it the way it is. So if I say anything that offends you, I'll try not to. I do it for a purpose. It keeps you awake, it keeps me awake, it keeps these guys awake, and it actually helps to stimulate some activity. Teeny bit of background. I've always worked globally. I've always worked with different cultures. I am not a technologist. I dealt with transformational change in industry and then in public administration. And then I thought, big central government's boring. So I went down to local administration and thought, wow, what a challenge. And then I said, wait a second, this is where everything happens. This is where people are. This is where industries grow. This is where public administrations and all the plurality of them work. This is the biggest transformational challenge we have, and we have to get it right. And so that's what I get involved in. We're only going to have a few slides, and we're going to have a discussion. And the more that we can make that discussion a joint discussion, the better. There are, what do you say? There's no females up here, for starters, and they're all middle-aged men. There are a bunch of middle-aged men here, most of whom I know and like, so they can take that. Firstly, I'll just briefly introduce who they are. Andrew Collins is the Chief Intelligence Officer for the Mayor of London. Yeah, that's good. It's a good start. And Nikolaos is involved with Eurocities, which, as most of you probably know, is a network of 140 or so cities, generally the largest cities in Europe. And Nikolaos has been involved in a number of activities, one of which is this. And then thankfully sitting down is Matthias, because if he stood up, then you'd know about it. He's very tall. Matthias is a delightful character who's working in the Commission. And as we've been working together on the European Innovation Partnership for 3+ years. It feels like a decade. And it's been great fun, because I really enjoy working with Matthias. Peter, I haven't met before, but we've spoken before. Peter Van Hammer is from Alliander, and so therefore represents the industry side of the picture. And I'll talk about what's been going on. And then finally, at the far end, we have Bart de Louth. Get it right, Graham. Bart de... yeah, one of them. And Bart is Dutch, and is working on an important project with the European Commission around standardization, which for a lot of people is really boring, but it's also really important. Because if we want common solutions for shared challenges, then we need that sort of thing. So this is the panel. I would like to set the scene with a number of slides, and then I'd like to show you a short 5-minute video, which has nothing to do with Europe, and I'll tell you about that shortly. And then we're going to have a conversation, and the more that you join in, the merrier. So, do I need to do something? Probably. Is it possible for one of the guys at the back that know about technology, as opposed to me, to maybe help figure out what I do? Apologies, I probably should have stopped talking before and concentrated hard. So let me talk briefly. How many of you have heard about the European Innovation Partnership for Smart Cities? One of those short acronyms. Oh, my goodness. It's the converted. You send all these lines to the... yes, Maria said it was all set up. I mean, I can live without them, but if you could maybe chat to Maria. So they said it was all set up. Okay. And he spent a long time loading up a very large video. That's very kind of you. We can do it without as well. So the EIP is the vehicle. By the way, there are 5 EIPs, and all of them deal with topics which happen in cities. What a surprise. That's where people are. The European Innovation Partnership for Smart Cities is an important vehicle. Within that, there are about 10 initiatives that have some real tangibles to them, one of which is in something called the Integrated Infrastructure and Processes and Data Action Cluster. So that's another long acronym, which I chair. There are 2 initiatives in there on purpose to do proper, sensible things. One is something we're not going to talk about, which is a lamppost. And the reason it's there is that that is an asset network that can be an array around an entire city that does extraordinary things. And it collects data, and you can put a price to it, and that's great. And the other is the urban platform, which, by the way, we can't put a price to because actually we're not too sure what it all is. But it's really important because if we want to share data across cities, then we need to understand what the platform is and how to build it. So, what we've been doing under the initiative of the urban platform within the long acronym is working on 3 things. And we've separated those things on purpose, and we're just at the process of bringing them together. So thing number 1 is demand side. And demand side is basically saying, what is it that we need from cities? What could we do with data? So it's a real discussion about outcomes and data, and then, by the way, what technologies help with that. So that's one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. The second piece of the jigsaw puzzle is the supply side, which is actually, here are all the solutions. Now, if I take you sideways for a bit, the market in smart cities has been technology-led and industry-driven, and we are moving towards something which is city needs-led and demand-driven. If that is the case, then that means we have intelligent buyers that know what they want, which is great for the supply side. So that shift is something that is really important. So on the demand side, we've got the supply side, which is actually what is it that we have and how can we come up with open, logical designs, physical realizations that may be different, and agree to actually capture that. And the third element that we're working on is on standardization. And standardization is clearly vitally important to make sure that we've got common solutions for shared challenges. So those are the 3 pieces. We've kept them separate on purpose because when cities get in the room, they want to have a conversation about city needs and city challenges, and the only way you're going to get that to be real is if it's cities saying, this is what goes wrong. And on the industry side, we've kept it separate because a lot of industry players actually don't really know what other industry players they should be talking to. So it's really useful to create some kind of ecosystem on that side. And at the moment, we're just at the transition point to bring that together. And if the slides come, then I can show you what it is that has been delivered as a result of that. Ooh, like magic. Wonderful. So let's have a look at what's been delivered as a result of that. First, a little bit of scene set. So our challenges and our ambitions. So the bottom says, by 2025, ensure that 300 million people in Europe, citizens in Europe, are served in their cities by urban platforms that provide better ways of consuming and using data. That's a decent-sized number by 2025. Why not? So that's the goal we're trying to set. Those are the 3 areas that we're working on. There's lots of words, but they're useful in that they set a bit of a boundary around what it is. So you probably spent a lot of time talking about platforms outside. We're trying to define these. They're not perfect. They're working definitions of 2 things. One is the platform side, and the other is what we mean by city data. And here comes another one that says this is a bit of the architecture of what we're working on. So here you have the 3, the demand, supply, and the standards. The first deliverable is a city needs specification, which was delivered in collaboration with a group of 30 or so cities, led by Andrew from London, that says, in a data sort of centric way, this is what we need. And that's been delivered several months back. More recently, there are two documents which Andrew will talk about. One is a leadership guide, which is intended to engage the politician level. Second is a management framework that's a toolkit for cities. So this is demand side. This is helping cities be intelligent about how they specify their needs. And then the third is a reference architecture, which has been delivered around the actual technical solution, the platform solution. And I should also say that in the standard side, Bart and the industry side have been saying what standards exist, so a landscaping on all of the standards. So that's what's done. The important thing is stuff's been delivered, but there's more to come. And on the more to come side, certainly on the demand side, business cases, how do I justify to the politicians, to the people that are making financial decisions, that it makes sense? What case studies are out there? What benchmarks might I work towards? By the way, there aren't a lot of benchmarks on costs, which is one of the challenges we face. And I'm not too sure what the plans are on the supply side, but next week in Brussels we get together to talk about this and move it forward. The leadership guide, there's a document. This is just to give you a bit of a picture. The 6 next steps for the political leaders. It's a short document, which is really important because mayors don't have a lot of time. So that's the leadership guide. We'll touch on that. The management framework, more engine room stuff here. This actually starts to think of a toolkit with a process that you can help city go through so that the management layer understand that they need to talk to each other, and they can begin to understand how to talk to each other and how to evaluate and what tools to use in that process. And then the architecture. You have to have a box and wire diagrams. It's essential. So I just picked out the picture side, which is the architecture, which Peter can talk about. And there's a lot of depth in there in terms of what you're seeing underneath that. So all documents are decent, chunky ones, apart from the leadership guide, which is quite short. So I've talked about the IP. This is also important. It's a spaghetti diagram of 7 current groups of consortia that are dealing with exactly the same topics: energy, integrated infrastructure, buildings and transport. They are $250 million investment from the European Commission. There are now 9. These are the 7, and there's 2 new ones, one called Ruggedize and the other called My Smart Life, I think. I can never remember which cities there are. Do you know what's interesting about that diagram? 5 of them are in Spain, 5 of them I think are in the UK. They're under the same regulation. Are they speaking to each other? They're in the same regulation for buildings. Are they speaking to each other? So there's something in there about collaboration around the 9, and that process has just started. What does that mean? For the cities in the room, that means there's a body of knowledge that's being formed, paid for by the Commission, seed funding. That means for supply, there's a more intelligent buying community, and there's scale. And scale is really important here. This is real, and also for the, oops, how do I pause? And how do I have volume? I could not be there with you all, but that... Sorry to ask you to come back up, but anybody know how to get the video to work properly? There's a short, so that gives a bit of a picture in terms of the European Innovation Partnership. There's a video from outside of Europe. So I was talking to Hardik Bhatt, who is now the CIO or the Secretary for Illinois State. And he talked about the ambition to have a smart state. And I said, what's that? And he says, I don't know. We'll invent it. And I said, cool, that sounds great. So we're supporting Hardik in his journey to create a smart state. Some of the things that Hardik says are very, very relevant for any state or country in Europe. He talks about demand aggregation. He talks about the smaller cities and the need to actually have common solutions for all the cities. So watch out for part of that.
Graham, thank you very much for getting me into Barcelona. I could not be there with you all, but that gives me an opportunity to invite you into my office. This is my office in the state of Illinois. We are working hard at transforming the state government through the use of technology. Barcelona, by the way, still remains the most favorite city for me on the planet, maybe after Chicago. I worked extensively with Barcelona in last 5 years when I was with Cisco, leading global market development for Cisco's smart and connected communities and Internet of Everything. As I started in Illinois last year, in the administration of the newly elected governor, Bruce Rauner, we identified an area and opportunity to transform the state government using technology much more wisely. So we embarked on a digital transformation journey, as you can see here. We divided our journey into 3 major steps. Step 1 was improving the business of IT, and we consolidated all of the technology organizations. We implemented ERP, we focused on cybersecurity, we focused on cloud, and we transformed how the state government technology is being operated. Step 2 was improving the business of the state using technology. And that's where we started using analytics, data-driven decision-making for the government. And we also started moving into mobile, the medium that most of our citizens now use to consume content. And we are transforming our customer service in a major way using technology. But I want to tell you about our step 3, which is making Illinois the #1 smart state in the country. With my experience in smart cities, I also started Chicago's Smart Cities initiative back in the last decade, and it is still goes on, and Chicago is considered one of the smartest cities today in the world. Illinois can become the #1 smart state, and we have a very clear path to that. We define a state government's role in becoming a smarter state in the US especially in 3 ways. State as a customer. You know, state government has similar verticals like a large city, and we can take the smart city solutions in transportation, public safety, public health, agriculture, and we can apply those to make the state government efficient. But state also is a great enabler for the smart city economy, and we can focus on with our policy and rulemaking authority on improving entrepreneurship, innovation, incubation, talent, and workforce development in partnership with our Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, as well as with our university and the community college and the school system. And that is state becoming an enabler for the 21st century smart cities economy. And the third one is state as a demand aggregator. You know, Chicago has a dense population and is attractive for smart city solutions, but there are so many other towns in Illinois which are smaller, which are in rural areas, and state is becoming a platform to enable all of these cities to become smarter. We are bringing our fiber network to the table as an equalizer for implementing smart city solutions. We're also using our joint statewide procurement authority, whereby we are going to procure multiple smart city solutions with multiple vendors, with multiple business models that other cities, the Illinois cities, can buy off of, creating an economy of scale and also an equalizer for all cities to become smart. Internally, we have built an IoT Center of Excellence with 11 different agency CIOs and business people and our Chief Information Security Officer working together to use IoT as a platform and build solutions on a unified platform and build analytics on top of that. Externally, we are fortunate to have large companies doing business in IoT and partners like Smart Cities Council, IDC, universities like University of Chicago, Northwestern, and Harvard to help us build our smart city strategy and help us create that vision and roadmap. We're also focusing on vertical integration, working with municipalities within Illinois, working with the federal government of the US, with the Department of Commerce, NTIA, NIST, Department of Homeland Security, and focusing on IoT security. And we are working aggressively and collaboratively with these various levels of government so that we can build IoT and use it for the next generation. We're also embarking on some international partnerships. We just signed an agreement with the Indian state of Telangana. India, as you know, has an ambitious plan of building 100 smart cities, and we want to learn from them. We also want to give them an opportunity to learn from us. We also want to open our smart city markets and opportunities for entrepreneurs on both sides. So we are working on those international partnerships. We'd be happy to explore other partnership opportunities that you, the audience, can bring to Illinois so that we can accelerate our journey to becoming a smart state. Once again, Smart Cities Council, Graham, Jesse, appreciate your partnership. Everybody sitting in the audience whoever is our partners. We really appreciate your time and your guidance for us to becoming a smart state. See you soon, either in Illinois or somewhere else. Thank you very much.
So that's Hardik. That's very human. There's what I would classify as being an intelligent client with an ambition. And it's interesting to pick up some of the things that he says in terms of jobs and growth. You know, he's not seeing it as a technology at the end. He's seeing it in terms of the outcomes. You've listened to that from your perspective. So the first couple of folks there. Andrew, there's an intelligent client. What does London look like? Tell me a bit in reality about that, and also tell me what it is that you've done to try and engage your leadership in London, more specifically around how they're going to use data better.
Right. Is this working? Yes. Okay. I was making notes on what I was going to say, Graham. I'd only got one ear on that, but I mean, in terms of similarities, I think what is impressive about what he's doing is trying to make the state a platform that joins up lots of smaller communities, lots of towns, as well as big centres like Chicago as well, which will be well known to everybody in the room, I'm sure. And that really is a similar problem to me in London, where I have 33 municipal authorities who are all on the front line delivering services to communities. I have the luxury of being at one step removed and have more time to think about the technology and the data and digital and the transformatory effect that those things can have. So I wouldn't quite say that we were as well aligned as Illinois are with some of their communities, but it's an ambition that we should pursue.
And in terms of the engagement of leadership in London around data,
yeah,
and the product that you've produced around the leadership guide, how do you see the product? How do you see it being consumed within London, and also the network of cities that you have within the Urban Platform Initiative?
Okay, well, I mean, shall I just talk briefly to this document and without repeating what Graham has said? I just want to ask a question first. Who in the audience works with politicians? Hands in the air, please. Actually, here's a better question. Who is a politician? Right, okay, good, before I go and say something that's too scurrilous about them. But a further question then. To those people who work with politicians, do your politicians buy data? Do they get it? Hands in the air if they do. Some, okay. And which of them buy smart? Hands in the air if you've got a politician, a political master who buys smart as a proposition. Well, there you go, you see. Yeah, it's a small sample size, yeah, and prone to statistical error, but we'll work with what we've got. Because this is really what got us going on the idea of writing this guide here, because we can write as many technical specifications and go into as much detail about data and its transformatory capacity, but actually we're not going to get anywhere unless we can really link data and its exploitation to policy outcomes and political outcomes in cities. For me at the moment, that's very much about having a new mayor who is mustard keen on air quality, who really wants to drive down energy consumption in the city. So those are my two means by which I will make data into something that is linked to political priorities. And that's really what this document tries to do in a broader sense, really. It just tries to say, data is too important for you to ignore. I actually think urban platform is a misnomer. That is one thing that will have those slightly mistrustful politicians sort of running for the hills. I'd rather just extol the virtues of data and say these are the ways in which it can help you run your city better. I couldn't put it any simpler than that.
What's the title of the document?
The title of the reworked title of the document, once I'd got my relatively poetic lips on it, was Rethinking the City, Using the Power of Data to Address Urban Challenges and Societal Change. And that really is what it's about. It's about saying there are disruptive business models out there. Airbnb, Uber are the very obvious examples. Things like blockchain are not well understood actually by political leaders and senior management within cities. And these are things in which communities participate. There's a sort of participatory market out there that's emerging in cities. And cities run the risk of being a little bit left behind. That's a sort of burning platform proposition here that we give to the politicians. And if they don't get to grips with how data is used in their city, then the next Airbnb, the next Uber will come along. And we don't want to find ourselves sort of reverse engineering regulation, which just makes cities look like negative forces. What we've got to do is be on the front foot with regards to technology and data and its application, and make sure that it does things like it does things like improve mobility, it does things like improve the environment and energy consumption, and does things like create 21st century public services in the city that these politicians run.
Thank you. So there is another document hiding underneath that, which is the management framework. Give us a 2 minutes on that, and then I'd like to actually figure out, so what's the process? How are we going to consume this? How are we going to prove that it actually adds value in reality with cities, both at political level and at executive level?
Okay, so as Graham said, that first document is a 10-minute read on the train that gets politicians going, okay, I'm now interested in this. The document, the other document, the management framework, is going to try not to repeat too much of what Graham has said, is really a document that's aimed more at the doers. It is aimed at your sort of CTO, CDO, CIO, senior sort of service level directors operating in municipal authorities. And it, of course, does set out the business case. It does so in less of a political sense and more so in terms of a brass tacks, here's what I need to do to the organisation to make sure that I can get an urban platform configured around the organisation's needs and then implemented. So there are various tools that it contains. It talks a lot about standards relating to interoperability and data discovery and the sorts of things that will prepare for IoT. It talks a lot about actually just making the case for urban platforms across a range of partners, probably the majority of whom sit outside of your own organisation, be they utilities, right through to citizens, right through to households, land development companies, anybody really who has some form of that thing called city data that you described that can be brought forward to be exploited. It also talks about some of the technical solutions as well, and then also goes into how you build the value case and the business case. Because, I mean, I think one of the problems that I've found around trying to communicate data and its effectiveness to get things done is that we need to bring the use cases forward. So this talks about how you develop the use cases and about how you build the broader value case for an urban platform.
Very good. So I know that Nick and yourself and a few others were involved in a conversation in Brussels about these two documents. Nick, what's your perspective as Eurocities with a membership of 140 different cities? Also thinking about what Hardik was saying, which is what's the role of big cities to help the market more generally in terms of how we move this forward to consume it, to test that politicians will read it and it's valuable, to test that managers and heads of service and such like cross-cutting roles will use it. What can Eurocities do to try and really exploit this and some of the other things that are coming out from this initiative?
Yeah. Thank you, Graham. Well, in an operational level, it's kind of straightforward. I mean, we push or we encourage our cities to follow this example and really go read it, contribute, and play the game. I mean, because there is a conceptual game that we are more interested in. It's what you said before. If we want to have a market that works in favor of the cities and not just seeing cities as consumers, they have to be involved from the beginning. It's not, they cannot just arrive at the last moment and say, okay, we want to buy and we want to buy what we want. There is no way to happen this. So it has to be from the design phase. And that's why from the first day that the urban platform, the memorandum and the whole initiative was out, we were very happy to see it and also support it and try to really push it and promote it to the full membership. I mean, there were 140 cities, as you say. For us, it's and I'm talking because, of course, we're dealing with a variety of cities, difficult political situations, different positions, geographical, economical, different everything. But there is a common story there, that it's one golden window of opportunity for cities to participate in the design of all this new era. If we're talking about disruptive business models, data, etc., and allow cities to really come, from square one and say that's what we would like to see, that's our objectives, what we would like to see taken into account.
And do you have a network, a community of the cities that sort of could incubate some of this in terms of the enthusiasts within the 140 that could do stuff and then expand it out from there?
Well, at least 2 communities of cities. I mean, we work, practically speaking, we work through our Knowledge Society Forum, which involves around 100 of our members. We work through our Green Digital Charter initiative, 51 cities committing to do some things at the highest level, mayor signing, etc. And these are 2 tools we use, networking tools, to go to cities and say, that's something we think is very important to really look at and work with.
Good. A final question. Have you, and maybe Andrew's got a view on this too, or anybody else, by the way, including you, how much does one of these things cost? What's the sort of range of budget that you're hearing in any conversations with cities in terms of establishing a technical means by which they manage data better? What range of costs come to mind?
I'm going to give you a don't know answer, Graham, because that's exactly the reason why we're writing these things, because we're not able to have an informed conversation at the moment with the supply side that gets us to a point where we can, put an exact figure on it. I know you asked for a range, but...
So does anybody in the audience know a range of costs? Because this, for me, is one of the great unknowns. I've heard numbers of around about 100,000 euros for a substantial sized city, to a handful, or even just creeping into a couple of handfuls of millions. That's an enormous range, and clearly we need to understand, what do you get for that? Because it's not the same thing. And I think that's where, from the demand side, if demand don't understand what they can do with things, can't get political commitment, can't get the different functions to work together, health, transport, etc., then we'll really struggle. So I think, for me, that's a big agenda item that we need to work through in terms of what should I budget for one of these things, in the conversation amongst the letter of intent, which I think is, 40 cities or something like that, and representatives from more. So, Matthias, he never knows what I'm going to ask him, and he gets really very nervous at this stage. How old is your... No. We talked about the EIP, which is the new vehicle that brings supply, demand, and investors together. And I also showed the slide around the SEC, or the 9 consortia. Clearly, one is already scale. You're investing $250,000 in that. And the other is coming up with some thinking and some tools to use. How can we build those 2 things together so that they really do sing and dance in the market, and are good for cities, and are good for industry, and good for investors? Thoughts on that?
Right. Okay. So I think you've done already part of the job. It's really by repeating that the 2 exist and run in parallel and should work together. And clearly this initiative here on urban platforms is a good example of that, because London, the City of London, is one of the main drivers of this initiative from the demand side perspective, and they're also a lead city in one of the Horizon 2020 Lighthouse projects, and they took this role really seriously. They're not just thinking about themselves as the city, how they can upgrade their infrastructure with the funding that they receive from the European Union, but they're also thinking of how can they improve the capacity in cities across Europe that don't get this funding. And that's why as a lead city there, they have produced with other cities these guiding documents that can be consumed and used by any city in Europe, really, because it was produced by cities in Europe that are as big as London, to cities that have just a few thousand inhabitants. So yeah, this is the prime example, and this is what we really would like to see more of in the future. That the Horizon 2020 cities, but also the industrial partners in our in those consortia, that they lay out what they have developed and give tools and guiding documents to other cities and players in Europe.
So one of your colleagues that happens to be sitting a little bit in that direction, at the Information Day 2 years ago, said, I would really like to see industry signing up to the Memorandum of Understanding and cities to sign up to the Letter of Intent if they're going to respond to the Horizon 2020 Lighthouse calls. That's the hints which the Commission as a convening force can really provide to influence the market as well as some of the funds. And do you see that desire that Marseille put forward to be building, to really influence the way the market operates?
So I can answer in the way that, of course, when we pointed out to cities that these documents exist, and that if even like the big cities in Europe think that it's worthwhile working with other cities on this, that they realize, well, you know, if even a city like London wants to cooperate with other cities, then my smaller city can definitely gain by joining this. And there we have a little trick that the documents, you can find the excerpts of them online, but if you want the full documents, you have to sign up to the Letter of Intent. It's free of charge, but you know, like this, at least we see who uses it, and we get into contact, and you can join us on this trip.
Good. No, so that's good. So there's the delicate positioning in the Commission of how to influence the market. Thank you for that. So let's turn from a demand picture, which I think actually demonstrate there's some real tangible products. There's a genuine collection of cities that are really trying to make a difference here, to the supply side. So I mentioned earlier, Peter, that this has come from a decade of technology companies pushing solutions to the market. They're not bad solutions, they're good solutions, but a market which is not ready for it. So a market needs to be city needs led, collective needs, and demand driven. So from the supply side, there's a lot of enthusiasm and energy of a variety of different players, large and small from all over Europe, getting together to collaborate. And some of them are direct competitors, and some of them are just from weird places, like the automotive industry and such like. How do you feel in terms of that journey? What does it feel like to get the suppliers in the room? And what have you produced as a result of that through that journey?
Okay, thank you, Graham. Does this work? Yeah?
Yep.
To answer your question, maybe I should briefly explain where I come from. I have a very technical background. I have a background in physics and artificial intelligence. I'm a data scientist by profession. And for some reason, I've spent my career trying to build bridges between politicians and technical people and scientists and business people. And that kept me rather busy, I must say. And actually, when I was thinking about the so-called reference architecture that we are producing now in this very sort of active and enthusiastic group within this consortium, we are doing the same thing. We're trying basically to find a common ground between suppliers and between cities and suppliers. And it's really quite basic, I must say, because everyone feels the need to have some kind of common framework, a common terminology. And it all starts with the very simple question, basically: what is an urban platform? And we have seen many solutions, as you just said, Graham, being offered to the market by many suppliers. But typically, they tend to address specific siloed applications, right? Some of the solutions are focused on urban mobility, others are focused on, I don't know, smart buildings, others are focused on making your energy usage more sustainable.
So is this architecture really starting to drive across the city?
Yeah, so the urban platform architecture that we are talking about here is a logical design of a common foundation that that should bring all these things together by offering interoperability, but also by offering a common understanding of what is needed. So the great benefit for the suppliers working together here is that we feel that this reference architecture will make the market less fragmented. So let me give you an example of that very briefly. I'm representing here an energy company called Alliander, and we work in many cities. And in each and every city, increasingly, we want to have interoperability with the systems in that city. The thing is, however, that in each city we have to talk a different language. You have to deal with non-standard interfaces. So, and the same goes for commercial software vendors. So the market currently is not very attractive to those software vendors because they cannot really standardize their products. So having a common reference architecture is not only beneficial for the cities themselves, but it's also sort of creating a more or a less fragmented market for the software vendors. Hence the enthusiasm, I would say.
Very good, thank you. I'm aware of the fact that there's a drink which Nicolas is going to offer to everybody, if that's
first
correct.
Things first.
From Eurocity. So I had one question, but I can't remember what it was. Oh, yes. What is the next thing that Eurocities has got where we can join in on this topic? I seem to recall there was something in January, and then you can tell everybody about the drink.
Yes, exactly. First of all, apologies that I have to go because we are organizing a reception in the EIP stand at 6 o'clock, so I will have to go to see that everything is on place.
EIP stand?
Yes, it's where all the European projects are.
Which is the far side.
It's the big stand in the middle with the European flags on top. You cannot miss it.
So there's a drink there.
Exactly. What's the next thing?
January?
25th of January, back-to-back with our next KSF meeting, we're organizing Cities in Transition Conference. And you are, of course, all welcome to register and come. And the idea is, it's exactly like the leadership guide here. There is no smart if you look at the front. It's one of the things we are dealing now as Eurocities. Many of our cities being meta-smart.
Yeah.
They think of themselves that smart isn't really the word to describe because as exactly the cover says here, we're talking about societal challenges. Yeah. It's not necessarily smart, intelligent, clever. It's how to solve the problems. Okay, so the idea is exactly to try to catch these key elements which could help cities in transition, that's a fact, to have a better or more efficient transition.
Good. Off to your drink.
25th of January.
Off to your drink. 25th of January is the date.
Thank you, Brussels. Thank you very
Nicolas. If we can pass the, and he genuinely means he's got a drink for you afterwards. Thanks, Nick. So Bart, you've heard some discussion around documents which are produced by cities. The worst thing about cities, they all want to make it all individual. So the good thing about this initiative is to try and create something at a leadership guide management framework level which is reasonably consistent. Through Espresso, how can we take those two documents and make them more for the city's market? And from the standpoint of a reference architecture and a lot of the interoperability and the data and the definitions and all that sort of good stuff, what is it that Espresso is doing to actually really help create this market? Because this is not standards for regulation, this is standards for growth.
Right. Actually, there was a lot of wisdom in that last sentence. I don't know if you put that in deliberately, but you
generally try to say things deliberately, but you know, sometimes not, even though I'm Scottish.
You said create markets and standards create markets. So I'll pick up on that, absolutely. The urban platform can only exist well if it is based on open standards. And I think when I walk around here and see all the solutions that are offered, I think implicitly, as a customer, you expect that the data that you'll get is based on open standards and that the access to that data is also based on open standards. That's an expectation, it's implicit. You expect it. In reality, because the market is very early, Andrew actually conducted, as part of on the demand side, a survey. One of the things that came out is cities are very much on the fence when it comes to procuring solutions because they lack the confidence. You have to pick a solution, but very little is there explicit mention of standards. And so in Espresso, we try to look at the market. We're not developing standards in Espresso. We're seeing the standards that are out there and making those explicit so that cities, when they acquire,
So it's a route map. It's an access means to what exists. But some of these are also new because they don't exist in the standards world. There is no standard organization that produces. In fact, it's Eurocities and World Bank and some of these others that produce this, which is not a bad thing. But the opportunity for standardization organizations to produce trusted guidance actually makes them relevant, which therefore means that the consumption of their technical documents is presumably more also relevant.
So I represent and work for a standards developing organization, and I work with other standard developing organizations, and we take these documents and provide them to the relevant working groups so that see what is actually coming out of the cities. What Peter was referring to earlier is when the supply side provides solutions. It's very early in the market, so it's very difficult for the solution providers to base their solution on standards. So it's a best effort. But they do create silos of information. It's very hard to link the two silos together. So again, here what we do is to make or create the awareness that there are standards that exist in a lot of these domains already, but that we just need to create that awareness.
Which in a market with thousands of cities is a hard job, but clearly this joined-up initiative is intending to do precisely that.
Yeah, and so as Nicolaus indicated earlier, we have a meeting on Monday where a lot of cities will come, and so I will lead a work group, and they asked me, what did I want to get out of that work group? And it really was, if a city procures, that at least they have the word standard in there, and that they consider standard when they procure.
Good.
And then I would already be very happy.
Excellent. So it's your turn now. Thank you for that, Bart. Are there some thoughts, questions from the audience in terms of, there's a microphone there and some up here that we can bring down. The gentleman in the middle.
Mihai Bilauca, Limerick City in the west of Ireland. Just a quick question. Is there a need to support the management of the councils, the politicians, to shift from a way they are making decisions at the moment into making decisions based on data? So they understand the data. Do we need to support them in the transition?
Yeah.
Training. It's a different way of actually doing their daily jobs.
Yeah. So I dare say, Andrew, that's probably your job. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is. And in terms of going back to this document and trying to sell it, again, what it tries to do is to make the value case to the politicians or the chief executives, to the individual as well as to the organisation. So it does talk about how you will be better able to set strategy on the basis of the proper exploitation of data. It talks about developing civic analytics. So it's sort of selling in our own services and data science potential. It talks about generating finance and economic value as well, both for the organisation as well as in a wider sense. And then there are a few other things besides that it says you have to do around resources and some of the policy and regulatory considerations. But it is very much about doing what you said about sort of underneath here's the big sell around data and why it matters in running your city. It does talk about some of the ways in which they need to be helped in doing so.
And this document, by the way, goes down a level to then turn around and say what different types of data exist.
And
Hardik mentioned IoT. What's that all that about? So it actually starts to try and dig into the various different forms to understand, do I move from paper to real time, and how long does that take? And which domains are most important to help the city actually, once the politicians got it, actually figure out what to do about it.
I think there's, sorry, super quick, I think there's some interesting lessons to learn from a discussion I had in the States the other week with CIOs and CDOs and CTOs, and it's about the centrality of those people's departments to the organisation. And traditionally, traditionally, the situation still persists where you've got some sort of capacity of the sort we're talking about here sitting in IT departments. Some people are sitting full square in the mayor's in the mayor's office. Some are sort of hanging around in intelligence functions like myself at some distance removed. So there's a real, to me this is about actually, as you make the data more important to the organisation, and so you have to make the supporting functions more central to it as well.
That's an interesting thing actually from standpoint of if you looked at the one end of the spectrum, the numpty cities that haven't even got it at any level versus the brilliant ones, what's the sort of picture that you see in terms of where the governance and management of data is? I'm not too sure whether I've seen that migration path of structurally, organizationally and governance-wise, how you deal with that. What's the picture that you see? But that sort of thing is very much what I dare say the demand side piece of it will be about trying to make this consume in consumption, being actually used, being tested, being improved and such like. Are there some other questions from folks in the audience? It's your opportunity to poke your finger at any of these characters. You want the drink, don't you?
Maybe Graham, I can comment on the last question here.
Yep.
Because I sometimes wonder whether we should try to sell the idea of using data and analytics at all. I mean, who cares? Shouldn't we just, it's the same with trying to sell smart cities to citizens. If I tell you, do you want a smart city? You probably, if you know what it is, you may say yes, perhaps. But if I tell you that, if I ask you, do you want to have a cleaner environment, or you want to shorten the distance between your house and your work, or whatever is sort of keeping people busy, keeping people awake.
Worry.
I understand, but no. But so the question I think is a valid one, but. I don't think we have to sell the instrument. We have to sell the solution.
Yeah. You clearly need the instrument for the solution. I think that's something which again reinforces that this is about the impact and the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And I think what hopefully you've seen is that there is an architecture, not a reference architecture, an architecture for the initiative that we have that tries to actually make that connection right the way through from the top of the office in the city who's worrying about democratic needs all the way through to actually inculcating it in documents that can be consumed by the market, both demand and supply as well. So we're nearing the end. If there aren't any more questions from the audience, are there any final thoughts from the panel in terms of things that you would like to say that you haven't as yet said?
I tried this earlier on today, where I compared the urban platform. If we look in a city at the roads and infrastructure is the enabler for the real economy. Is the urban platform the enabler for the data economy? Question mark.
No, it's a good question. It's a good point to leave people on to consider, because I think the answer is kind of lingering there as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to close this off. Thank you. Oh, no, I'm not.
Just one very, very practical hint. So if you want to find out more about the EIP and the documents that were presented, please check out the marketplace under eu-smartcities.eu. That's it. Thank you.
That was the advertorial. Thank you. Very good. They're all done. Splendid. So there's some humor and some humanness in what we're up to. When we first got together as a group 2 years ago, it wasn't like that. It was kind of tense conversations, and I think there's a human side, there's a behavioral side to actually collaborating, which is really important. So we're beginning to see that happen, and that's, for me, a very exciting aspect of how you actually transform a whole market as opposed to let's buy a platform. So you've heard from the States, they want to be smart. Let's be smarter. We've heard that we've got a coherent initiative within a bigger picture of the EIP, doing something very practical, very tangible, and now delivered. 4 documents that we've talked about, and ambitions to do more. As investors, as not-for-profits, as industry, as cities, your choice is to join in, and it would be delightful if you did, because that would make the world a better place. So thank you, the panel. You got the website link, the advertorial from the Commission. It's good. Thank you for joining in, and remember, the EIP is the drink. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the time here.